first of 2 open house theater history classes this semester. And our goal really is to share with the greater UCF community and, the world, some of the exciting learning and collaborations that we have going on in our theater classrooms. Special thanks to Professor Rani. Thanks to Stephen Risco, who's managing the YouTube live streaming right now, and Victoria Weston, who's helped us with marketing. And thank you to the UCF dramaturgs and the School of Performing Arts for supporting this chat. This is being live streamed and recorded, and it will be available later on YouTube, so you can share it with your friends. And our second and final open theater history class is going to be with another person that Bhargav and I know, named Professor Donatella Galela, and she's going to be live streaming on Wednesday, November 4th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, and she's going to be talking about her article on multiracial casting in Hamilton. And you can find more information on that talk on the College of Arts and Humanities website. So now let's get to the real deal of why we're all here today, which is to talk with Professor Bhargav Rani about the Ram Lila. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to him. I'm lucky to call him both a colleague and a friend. I met him while I was finishing up my doctoral studies in New York. Bhargav is still a doctoral student of theater and performance at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, where we met. He graduated with an MPhil in theater and performance studies from, will you help me with this, Bhargav?
Oh, it's Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is in New Delhi. And there, his thesis engaged with the philosophy and phenomenology of play in the ritual performance tradition of the Rmanagar Ram Lila near Banaras, India, which is what we're talking about today. His current research engages with Walter Benjamin's philosophy of history and theories of performance of everyday life. And he's writing a history of urban consciousness and everyday practice in Banaras at the intersection of capitalist modernity and Hindu nationalism from the late 19th century to the present. So I think some of those threads of conversation we'll pull in today. And that's it for me. Let's just have Bhargav take it away from here.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be sharing this with all of you. This is a subject that I love. I've been studying for many, many years now. The first time I attended the Ram Lila was in 2011, and I've had the opportunities to actually go back from like 3-4 times again after that. Just a couple of words about the readings and the video that I assigned. Firstly, it's very difficult to actually get any good video footage of the Ram Lila. And this is actually the first time I'm taking a class where I found some decent footage, or otherwise it would usually have been a Schechner reading or an essay and some photographs that I had taken on the field. This is mainly because they do not generally allow videography over there. And the documentary that I sent you, it is a good resource in the sense that it is a nice visual document. And from what Chloe tells me, people come here with a lot of different interests. There are actors over here, the theater historians as well. There are people in set design. And I wanted you all to have a visual of how this really spectacular performance happens, so that might get your brain running, and that might get some questions about what the Ram Lila is. Now, that said, let's jump right into it. Okay. So let's start first. I'm just going to talk a little bit because you have a sense of how it looks visually. I'm just going to try to put things into perspective and highlight some of the important points for you to remember about this performance tradition. Now, firstly, let's start with the context. What is the Ram Lila, and what is the specific Ram Lila that we are talking about? The Ram Lila, the word Ram Lila literally translates into Rama's play. The word Lila means play. But again, the translation play seems very mundane, because actually the word Lila encompasses a philosophical concept. And what the concept is essentially is that it is the big answer to the really big question of, philosophical question of if the gods are all self-sufficient and free of all desires, then what motivates them to create humans and sustain this world? And the answer within Hindu cosmology has been for many, many centuries this concept of Lila, which means that the reason why we have this existence and why God sustained this existence is not out of any particular reason, in fact, but rather it is for its own sake. It's for the sake of play. They're playing. And so the concept of playing and the concept of performance, which is attendant to the idea of playing, is very central at a philosophical level itself. And this is what gets translated in the performance tradition of the Ram Lila. But quite literally speaking, Ram Lila is a dramatic enactment of the story of Rama. Now, what is the story of Rama? Now, I'm not going to get into the narrative specifics of the story, but talk more broadly about the historical contours of it. The story is really, really old. It's about over 2 millennia old. The first textual tradition of the Ram Lila dates back to somewhere between the 4th century BC and the 2nd century CE. And this is a Sanskrit text written by Valmiki, and that is called the Ramayana. This has been a very important text elaborating on the story of Rama. But one very important thing to remember is that many, many, many versions of the story. The story has traveled, surprising to many, many countries. There are different versions of the story in different Indian languages. It has traveled in like Indonesia, Bali, many parts of Southeast Asia, and the story has been a source of many different performance traditions across the world. So that is something very important to remember, that this is not a single codified story. There are multiple interpretations. There are many different Ramayanas. And today, we're going to be talking about one particular version of the story, which is the Ramayana that was written in the 16th century by this guy called Tulsidas. Tulsidas was a poet saint who was in Banaras and in Ayodhya and other places. But Tulsidas writes this book called the Ramcharitmanas, which is the story of Rama. And Ramcharitmanas translates into the lake of Rama's deeds or something like that. And this was written in the 16th century, around the same. He was actually a contemporary of Shakespeare. And what is very significant about Tulsidas's writing of the Ramcharitmanas was that the dominant textual tradition of the Rama story, which was Valmiki's Ramayana from 1500 years before that was in Sanskrit. And Sanskrit as a spoken language in everyday practice had died down long back. Like there was nobody who used to speak Sanskrit in the 15th, 16th century. So the people who had access to the text, Valmiki's text in the story of Rama, were the priestly classes or the so-called upper caste or the Brahmin classes within India. And so Tulsidas's actually retelling of the story of Rama in the vernacular then, which was known as Avadi, his rewriting of it in the vernacular was in many ways a radical political act. And he suffered a lot of flack for it. Because for the priest, this was taboo. Like you're basically taking away our livelihood in a way. Like, if we are the guardians of this tradition and we are going to determine how it is interpreted, now you've made it accessible to the masses in some way. So that was in some way a very radical thing to have done. And he suffered a lot of trouble for it. And fun fact, actually, I'm actually speaking to you now from Banaras, and where I live now is the same neighborhood where Tulsidas is believed to have finished his great masterpiece. And the Ramcharitmanas, in short, it is called as the Manas, is considered as one of the greatest literary works of greatest works of devotional literature from that period. And this writing of the Ramcharitmanas, and in fact, there are also fun stories in the sense that Tulsidas he used to live on the northern part of the city, and whereas now where we live is in the southern part of the city. But he was actually driven out from the northern part, and he was harassed regularly on an everyday basis by the priestly classes because of what he was doing. There are like funny tales about how young kids used to, when Tulsidas used to go to bathe in the river, young kids used to steal his underwear and run away. So he was really harassed by the people around that time. And finally, he had to migrate to the southern part, which was mostly more jungle and more forest area. It was not as developed, and he settled over here. And this site becomes very significant then. Anyway, so Tulsidas, the writing of Rama's story in the vernacular obviously becomes immensely popular. But now, at the same time, you do not have too many people who are literate. It's not that everybody can read what he's written in the vernacular. You can understand it, but that doesn't mean you can read it. And it is around this time that it is believed that the tradition of performing the Ram Lila has also started. So now the way in which Tulsidas's text gets disseminated to the masses is through the medium of song, poetry, and performance. And the Ram Lila is one particular legacy of this dissemination. It is, and Ram Lila is the idea of enacting Tulsidas's version of Rama's story, and which begins here in the 16th century. And so we are talking about 400 years back, and it is also believed that the first Ram Lila that Tulsidas himself started actually happened in this very neighborhood here. And the Ram Lila is still performed. It happens for about 20 days, but its dramaturgy is a little different from what we're going to get more deeper into with the Rmanagar Ram Lila. So this is the story from Valmiki's Sanskrit thing, then the many different versions of the Ramayana. Then we come to Tulsidas in the 16th century, and there's radical writing of Rama's story in the vernacular, giving birth to the tradition of the Ram Leelas in some way. And now we come further ahead in history and focus on the Rmanagar Ram Leela. Now we are coming into the 19th century now. Now, before we get deeper into the Ram Leelas, the other contextual thing to remember is about the city of Banaras itself. My research is writing a history of Banaras from the 19th century on. But more broadly, it's important to know what Banaras is as a concept and as a city. Banaras is believed to be one of the ancient cities of the world. There is a continuous civilization that has been inhabiting the city for over 3,000 years, it is believed. It is on the banks of the river Ganga, which is one of the most important rivers of India, a holy river. And because of the really rich, fertile lands along the banks of the river, that has been the site of settlements over the many centuries of different communities, and the site where different cities have emerged and developed. And Banaras is once a city, and hence has also been prosperous by virtue of being a riverside city. It connects trade all the way from Afghanistan to the eastern coast of India. And Banaras, what is significant about it is that Banaras is the nerve center of Hinduism. It has developed into a nerve center of Hinduism over the last many centuries. It is the stronghold of Hindu thought, and within Hindu mythology and cosmology, it is believed that Banaras is a city that was there at the beginning of time, and it is going to remain standing at the end of time. It is a city of the god Shiva, and it is supposed to be located on the top of a trident, and it is something that is untouched by the currents of time and currents of history in some way. So that is the deep mythology that surrounds Banaras as a city. And it is important to remember this when we start talking about the Rmanagar Ram Lila, because Ramnagar, the town Ramnagar, is the small town that is located on the other side of the river Ganga to Banaras. So this side is Banaras. If we cross the river to the other side, that's the small town of Ramnagar. So its proximity to Banaras in many ways brings a certain aura to the performance. It brings a certain symbolic significance to it. And more particularly, while it is happening not necessarily within the precincts of the sacred boundary over your sacred city, it was developed in the 19th century by what were known as the Maharajas of Banaras, which means the kings of Banaras. And it is this dynasty which was patronizing this ritual, which started this ritual, and it is the patronage from the kings of Banaras that gives this immense gravity to this performance tradition. Now, when I say the Maharaja of Banaras, there's the other caveats to remember over here, which is that this dynasty that I'm referring to of the Maharajas starts in the 18th century. But India was a colony of the British Empire for 2 centuries, from the mid 18th century to 1947. So when we are talking about the king of Banaras, what we mean is that the king really never had any political power. He was in many ways just a figurehead. He was a minion of the British. And for the British, it was more convenient to have a Hindu king who, for namesake, rules the people, and rather than try to exert control directly as outsiders and conquer the land. And through the course of the 19th century, or throughout the course of the empire for the most part, the Maharajas of Banaras have been loyal to the British. So, and that is what allowed them to keep power here in Banaras. So the experience of history or colonization in Banaras is a little different as compared to some of the other parts of the country. And this is significant because now the Maharaja of Banaras in the 18th and the 19th centuries, the Maharajas, they lacked political power. So what do? One of the ways in which they negotiated this lack of political power was to amass a lot of social capital and social and symbolic power. And one very significant way of doing this was through patronage of arts and culture. Through the 19th century, the Maharajas have been one of the chief patrons of almost all performance and artistic traditions that have proliferated in Banaras. And this was a way for them to establish themselves as kings and as important figures within that landscape, within the social landscape. And the Ram Lila has in many ways been the crown jewel of all of this. It is the biggest, most elaborate performance tradition that was created by the Maharajas. And that I think it is a tradition that most emphatically establishes the Maharaja as the king of the people in some way. So that is one thing that we need to remember about the context of the Ram Lilas. Now, 1947, India gets independence. We become a secular democracy. So there are no longer any kings. The Maharaja of Banaras, even before, did not have much political power, but post-independence, he has got no political power. And the kind of allowance he was getting, the privy purse allowances he was getting, also came to an end by 1970. So now, in today's day and age, when the Ram Lilas performed, in some ways, this is the only thing that kind of records some kind of gravity to the position of the Maharaja. So it is significant in that way. So I think this should do about the context. And I want to jump in now to talk about the form itself. What's happening in the Ram Lila? About the dramaturgy of the Ram Lila and the form, the Rmanagar Ram Lila specifically is the longest, largest, and arguably the most sacred Ram Lila in all of India. Now let's try to unpack all these three adjectives one by one. Firstly, it's important to remember that we're talking about one Ram Lila tradition, one particular Ram Lila tradition. Ram Lila, which means the dramatic enactment of Rama's story that happens in many different places in India. So there are thousands of Ram Lilas that happen around this time of the year. And some of them could be as small as a neighborhood just coming together and having 2 days of Ram Lila, where there might be negligible or no performance element at all. It would just be worshipping the gods. Or it could be something like about 10 days where you select certain important episodes and perform those episodes. So it can vary in terms of length, in terms of the scale, and there are in terms of its grandeur. And there are thousands of Ram Lilas that are prevalent in especially the northern part of India. Now, the Rmanagar Ram Lila, when I say it's the longest, the largest, and arguably the most sacred, let's look deeper into all these three adjectives. Firstly, the longest. This brings us to the aspect of time in the Rmanagar Ram Lila. One of the most distinguishing features of this Ram Lila is that it happens for an entire 1 month. Now imagine that, it's not like you go to one day, just buy a ticket to the theater, go have a good evening and come back. It is for an entire month. Your everyday life is fundamentally changed. All you think about is the Ram Lila. You wake up, you're thinking about the Ram Lila, you go and attend the Ram Lila in the evening, you come back again in the night, the next day again you wake up, that's what you're thinking about, then you could again attend in the evening. So it just completely encompasses you. It encompasses your everyday life. And the way it works is the entire story of Rama's life, which is dramatically enacted over there, there is a narrative continuity that is preserved. So today we're going to start with Rama's birth on the first day or the second day of the Ram Lila. And we're going to perform the episodes from Rama's life from that point of time. And the next day, where the narrative ends on that particular day in that evening, the next day we're going to continue and pick off from where we left off the previous day. So in this manner, the narrative is kind of slowly played out over the course of one full month. So that is very significant. And I think it is, and yeah, I'm sure it is the longest. I don't think there's any other Ram Lila that happens for such a long duration of time. So the longest, and that is one significant aspect. Now, the largest, the second aspect of it. Now here we're coming to the question of space. And in terms of space, the unique thing about the Rmanagar Ram Lila, as opposed to the other Ram Lila traditions, is that it encompasses the entire town of Ramnagar within the ambit of its performance space. So what I mean is that there is no single stage where we're going to come meet every day at that particular point. This is the proscenium stage over here. That's where the action happens. Here, this is where we are sitting and we're going to look on. And then tomorrow again, we come back and sit at the same spot. That's not how it works. There is, in fact, a logic to how the space has been organized, a very intricate logic to how the space has been organized. And the way it has been done is, within the story of Rama, there are many locations that feature, many geographical locations that feature within this narrative. And these geographical locations, which have been identified with various cities in India currently, they are all pilgrimage sites. Like, there are places that, devotees of Rama would want to go and visit at some point in their life and pay homage over there. And what they do in the Ramnagar Ram Lila is that they create a microcosm of all these different locations physically in the town of Ramnagar. So if there are 10 major locations that feature, like Ram was born in the city of Ayodhya. So in Ramnagar, there is a small ground called Ayodhya, and it is meant for all the episodes from Rama's life which happen in Ayodhya. So the first 4-5 days of the Ram Lila, where we are talking about episodes of Rama's birth and his growing up, and he is in Ayodhya in those episodes, they are all performed in Ayodhya. And as you would have seen in the video, at the point where the narrative shifts, now say on day 4 or day 5, Ram is going to this other city of Janakpur, where he's going to soon marry his wife Sita. And what happens in the performance is, people go, after the episodes in Ayodhya end, people are going to get up, and everyone en masse is going to walk towards Janakpur. And Janakpur is not next door. Janakpur is like a mile away. So we have thousands and thousands of people following the actors, following the gods as they move from one location to the other, so that they can enact this next part of the narrative, which is Ram winning Sita's hand in marriage. So this spatial aspect is very, very significant. Now that's something that makes it very significant, very unique as opposed to some of the other Ram Leelas. Now the other aspect, the third thing that I said, is that it's the most sacred. And here, let's talk about the actors themselves. Now, the 5 main actors, or the 5 main characters in the Rama story, are Ram and his 3 brothers, and his wife Sita. Now, these are the 5 main characters, and these are all deemed to be gods. And these roles are specifically played by young prepubescent boys, about 10 to 12 years old. All the roles are played by all these 5 roles are played by young prepubescent boys. And they are selected through an audition by the Maharaja every year. And oftentimes, one of the actors who's played, say, one of the younger brothers of Ram would probably play Ram in the coming years. And it works in that way. But what is significant when we come to the idea of sacred space and sacrality of the Ram Lila is that these young boys who are playing these roles are deemed to be the gods themselves for the duration of the ritual. And this is very important. They are not play acting, they are not playing at the role of Rama, they are not embodying the role that they are the gods. And this aspect of the Ram Leela gives a completely different hue to the whole experience of the performance. So now, if we bring back the idea of how it is spatially organized and put that in relation to this idea that they are holy actors, they are the gods who are walking this hallowed ground now, there is another idea that comes in, which is the idea of pilgrimage. So watching the Ram Leela is to actually be in the presence of gods as they enact the story of Rama's life, as they make present this mythological tale. And because you're watching gods, not actors, but gods walking from Ayodhya and to Janakpur, and then later going into battle and fighting the demon king Ravana in the end, and because you're witnessing all this with your own eyes, what you're essentially doing is that you're embarking on a pilgrimage. And these particular spots, like the ground Ayodhya, the ground Janakpur, the big ground Lanka, they are not just mundane performance spaces anymore. They become as sacred as the real Ayodhya or the real Janakpur. And for the people who participate in this ritual for the entire month-long duration, it is for them tantamount to going on a pilgrimage of all of these Rama's pilgrimage centers across India. So through the means of a performance, through the means of a ritual tradition, you have activated space in a completely unique way, and you have created a different immersive experience of what it means to perform or to engage with the story of Rama. In terms of sacrality, so because it is a pilgrimage, this brings us to another important aspect that I want to just flag, which is the audiences. Who are the audiences over here, and how do they engage with this ritual performance? Now, firstly, the sheer numbers is astounding. Like, we have a month-long performance, and the average attendance on every single day is about 10, 15,000 people. And on certain important days of the Ram Leela, when certain important popular episodes are being enacted and staged, you have crowds in the numbers of 50, 60, 70,000 people. And like, this is like filling up huge football stadiums, like, you know, and this happens regularly every year. So we're talking about huge crowds. But even among these large audiences, there are different classes of attendees. There are some who would attend only for the important days because, I mean, it's difficult to attend for the entire 1 month. But there are these special class of audiences who are called nemis. And nemis, the word actually derives from a Hindi word called niyami, which means to be principled, like, you know, to follow something by the principle. And what these audience members basically are doing is that they attend every single day of the Ram Leela, follow the entire narrative from beginning to end for the whole month, and they have been doing this for decades. So we're talking about people who have been attending this for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and doesn't matter what's happening in your life, this 1 month of the year is dedicated to the Ram Leela. And when I actually talk to some of these audience members, what is very fascinating is, I mean, I'm talking to people who have attended for, say, 35 years. Okay, and I meet them and we're all going to the Ram Leela, and I say, so this year you're going to be attending the whole Leela again. And they're never sure. And they say, let's see. because they believe that you need to be blessed to have this opportunity to attend the Ram Lila for the entire 1 month. It is possible like that one fine day you might fall sick, one fine day there might be immense rain, and like you might not find any transport to go to Ramnagar. And that day you will miss the Ram Lila. And this is something that brings immense sadness to these audiences, because it's something that they so deeply feel about. And so they are never so sure as to say, oh, of course I'm going to attend this year. I plan to attend all my life. Every year is a test of their faith. And if they do succeed in attending the Ram Lila for the entire 1 month, they feel blessed. They feel that they have been blessed to watch this ritual for the entirety and to get the blessings of the gods and to participate in this. And and the other thing in terms of the engagement of the audiences is the extent to which it encompasses their everyday for that 1 month duration. Now, these might be shopkeepers, these people have small businesses, or they might be working in certain offices and all. But for this 1 month of the Leela, people are shutting shop for the whole month. Or they're just opening shop for a few hours in the morning, and then they're just shutting it and closing businesses so that they can go watch the Ram Leela. If they're working in some offices, they're just taking a leave for a month and just coming to see the Ram Leela. That's the kind of commitment that they have. And every day they would gather by the river banks at 3 or 4 o'clock in the evening, and they would all embark on a boat and travel to the across the river and go to the Ramnagar side. There they would wait on the river. They'd put on their fresh new clothes that they've bought specifically for the Ram Leela, and they would deck up, put sandalwood paste on their forehead, put fresh fragrances so that they are dressed and they're smelling good for the gods. And they would then go with their gang of friends with whom they've been attending this for again many decades, all of them together, and they would go and they would really enjoy the Leela. Because at one hand, when I say that it's an act of penance, it's a pilgrimage to attend the Ram Leela for the entire 1 month. It's not easy. There are a lot of challenges. To commit something to 1 month and do it so rigorously is never easy. And but at the same time, the other thing to remember about the audiences is that they are having a lot of fun. They love doing this. Let's not forget that in all of this equation. It is religious, it is an act of devotion, but that doesn't stop them from having fun. It is a truly enriching experience for them. And they really revel in that immersive experience that the Ram Leela produces for the entire 1 month. So this is about the audiences. Now, how much time? Okay. Now, I actually want to open it up for discussion right now. I have a few more points to say, which like photographers, different people over here, and you've seen the video. So maybe we can take some questions now and then up with certain.
Bhargav, that was a tiny bit choppy, but I'm pretty sure we got the gist of what you were saying, which is that you'd like us to ask some questions based on your lecture and the video documentary. Is that pretty much in line with where we're going? Awesome. So
Yes,
students,
yes.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Bhargav. Any questions from the students? Yeah, Katie.
First of all, thank you for being
Hi.
with us.
Yes.
Hello. Thank you for being with us today. This is very fascinating and really cool to be a part of this world today. So I just had a question off of our module, and I was interested in your thoughts about it. What do you think are the similarities that you think sorry if I pronounce it wrong, Ram Lila and traditional Western theater? What's the similarities between the two, that off of your research on maybe both or just one or the other?
Yeah, actually, I was meaning to touch on this. but I might as well do it now because you've raised the question, which is, or let me just reframe it within the larger context now, which is that you're all theater students, theater in Florida, you're all the larger question would be, what's the point of studying the Ramda? Like, what does it give us? Like, because we are, I mean, in a completely different cultural context. And what does it do to learn about, am I clear? Are there some technical glitches, Chloe?
I think it's actually caught up. So I think you're doing, it's fine now. Yeah.
Chloe, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, give me a moment. Let me just switch my internet because I think there is. Okay, can you all hear me now?
Yeah, that's great. We totally understand the tech issues. We've been having them all semester.
Okay. All right. So going back to the question, so the larger question that we need to address if you're reading this in a theater history class is what's the point of studying the Ram Lila in a different cultural context? And you asked about the similarities or with traditions of Western theater, or maybe the lack of similarities in some way. But maybe we need to zoom in a little bit more on this question because, firstly, at a very general level as to why we need to study the Ram Lila, this goes back to the 1970s and 80s with the birth of performance studies when, Ram Lila gets first written about. And that historical moment basically is the time of post-colonialism. And you have so many different countries in the world achieving their independence. And we now need to have a post-colonial identity. And in terms of the post-colonial identity that way, just a second, I'm sorry. Yeah. So one of the things the reason why Ram Lila gets incorporated in academia, in theater, this thing is because of a certain temper of the times, which is a critique of Eurocentrism, a critique of a Western idea of theater. Theater canon for many, many decades before that was defined purely in terms of Western theater. And this was a way of subverting that, breaking that mold, and to try to give a sense of what are theater traditions in other parts of the world. So that has in many ways become a post-colonial orthodoxy now. Yeah, we need to talk about non-Western theaters because of Eurocentrism and so and so and so. So that's something that's every class gets inculcated in. But now let's also think at a more deeper level. And the second point to think about when we are looking at the Ram Lila fundamentally, and again, this goes back to your question, Katie, about what are the similarities. I'm going to talk about one fundamental difference that this shows. And one fundamental difference that it shows is that it shows a different history of performance and a different context of performance. And what I mean by that is that more specifically, as opposed to the long history of anti-theatrical prejudice that has characterized the development of Western theater, here we have a completely different concept of performance. Now, we have people from Plato to Augustine to Tertullian, writing indictments of theater artists being relegated in Shakespearean time to the outskirts of the city. So theater has always been, or I wouldn't generalize it always, but has for the most part been looked at with suspicion, simply by virtue of the fact that it was believed that theater represents certain performance of a certain falsity. It is not truth that is happening over there, but you're play acting, you're doing something false, you're acting. Now, as opposed to that, what the Ram Lila tradition specifically, and more broadly, the idea of performance in the Indian cultural context signifies is something completely opposite. It is not saying that theater is just because you're acting on stage or you're pretending on stage, it is a marker of falsity. On the contrary, what the Ram Lila is basically saying is that performance and the idea of performance is in fact a privileged site for you to experience a more higher truth, a more divine metaphysical truth. So it is a site where, we're now confronted with a completely different concept, history of theater and performance. Here, for the last at least 400-500 years, performance has been used not as something that would be a reflection of people's falsity, but rather it would be a reflection of it would be one of the more choice of the privileged ways in which you can experience a more greater truth than the everyday mundane reality. So that's something to remember. That's a different idea of performance, and this idea of performance should actually help you rethink in some way what theater means in your own cultural context. Now, the last thing I just want to say about why we look at the Ram Lila, and this is not something that is often brought up when we're talking about the Ram Lila, but I feel it's relevant, especially from the location with which you're actually reading, from Florida and from within the Western theatrical canon, and which is this idea of community theater more broadly, but more specifically the idea of the amateur. Now, when I say amateur, I do not mean someone who's not an expert. By all means, all the practitioners of the Ram Lila are all experts in their own right. Let's be clear about that. They're all experts in what they're doing. But by amateur, I mean the opposite of a professional. And this is where I want to bring in the idea of the professionalization of theater that happens, and what it means when this professionalization has been, at least for the most part of its history, absent within a theater tradition. And what I mean is, what is the politics of theater, of amateur theater, as opposed to professional theater? And if you look at the theater canon, if you look at studying theater history is a history of, or the canon is entirely a history of professional theater. We are looking at professional theater practitioners, actors, playwrights, Ibsen, Chekhov, Strindberg. It's all professional theaters. And even now, and absolutely, you're all training to enter the profession. You're all wanting to be professionals. That is the reality of the theater scene, yes. But in this emphasis on the professional theater, I think one of the things that gets lost out is, how does theater function within the amateur world? How do amateurs relate to theater? And by amateurs as opposed to professional, I mean that amateurs were engaging in theater just for the sake of it, for pure love, for pure labor, as opposed to a professional who's a professional, who is earning money out of it, who is participating within the global networks or the economy of theater within the global networks. As opposed to that, what does it mean for an individual to engage in theater just for the pure sake of it? And here in the Rmanagar Ram Lila, it's significant. Like last year when I went to the Ram Lila, I was shocked to see that the performers do get paid for their performance. But I was shocked to see that the performers were paid $30 for their entire 1 month of labor. And all of them obviously spent more to just be part of it. Just to travel from their homes every day to come over there to whatever, to eat out or whatever, So the thing is, they're not doing this for the money in many ways. There is no money. In fact, if you have to participate in it, you have to spend money from your pocket. They're doing this because it's a matter of faith, and there's a different relationship to the performance that they have. And while amateur is a category that is not often invoked when you're talking about this, because it's often used pejoratively and all, but I feel there's a radical potential to the idea of amateur and amateur theater, and I think that is very central in making the Rmanagar Ram Lila efficacious, and at least to such a great extent. So these 3 points are something I want to leave you with, and I hope, Katie, this kind of helps you think about the differences or the similarities. I don't know about the similarities. Maybe I'm talking more about the differences, but maybe you can think about the similarities.
Thanks so much, Bhargav. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So someone in the YouTube streaming has actually sent this along. And they're asking, which kind of ties back to this idea of amateur acting that you're just talking about. What is the purpose of the gods coming down in the forms of these boys? Is it to instruct? Do they know that do the boys know that they are performing for a contemporary audience? Or I guess it's either the boys or the gods, but I guess your point is that it's the same thing. And are they living out memories or are they playing?
I mean, what are the young boys thinking? I mean, they're skipping school for like 3 months. They're realizing they've been taken care of, like they're being treated like gods for the entire 1 month. Like people are falling at their feet. I mean, it's going to be an unreal experience for any young kid who's like 10, 12 years old, like, you know. And there has been some historical change in this as well. It used to be more easy. Like it is a matter of great pride for these families to say that, like, you know, our son is now Rama in this particular year, and they themselves take it as an immense honor to have been selected to be playing this part. What and What do they actually make of themselves playing this part? It's a difficult question. But maybe one way to answer that is that I had actually met one of the actors who had played Ram. This was in 2011. I'd met one of the actors who had played Ram when he was a young boy. When I'd met him, he was about 20, 21 years old. But he, only about 10 years back, maybe in the early 2000s, had played Ram for a continuous about 5 or 6 years. He was like, people loved him. Like, his voice was amazing. He could like project all the way to the end of the crowd, and his emotions and everything was brilliant. And he was very popular. And I met him when he was a young college kid, like, you know. And one very interesting thing that happened was, like, I'm sitting with him, I'm talking with him, and then all these people start coming, like, you know, people who've been attending the Ram Lila who recognize him as having played Ram so many years back. They come to him and they are asking for his advice. And these are people who are in their 60s, like, you know, in their 70s, and this is young 20, 21-year-old kid, like, you know. So I guess it does have an impact on their life in some way. Like, you know, their sense of self is in some way impacted by the fact that they have played this, that they feel that they have had this great opportunity to play the part of the gods. And it kind of inflects people's behavior towards them. So I found that to be very interesting. I hope that answers in some way the question.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess just on a sort of closing note question, what is Ram Lila looking like today in these troubled times of a pandemic?
So while I'm very happy that I'm having this opportunity to sit here now at this time and, like, you know, share this with you, I'm also sad that I'm having to sit here right now at this time to share with you, because that means that Ram Lila is not happening. Like, Ram Lila has been cancelled this year, and this, like, I think the Maharaja of Banaras basically contracted coronavirus, and yeah, it's just not happening. And last week, when I was talking to one of the head priests who sings the Ramcharitmanas during the performance, he mentioned, like, one of the things he said was very interesting. He said that like, this is the first time in its 230 odd year history that the Ram Lila is not happening. And so that's a big deal, like, you know. And so imagine this, what this means for people who have been attending it for 40 years. Like, you know, this year, suddenly there is no Ram Lila. For 40 years, from September to October, during this determined time, they are every day going to the Ram Lila. So when I was asking him, so now you have to wait till next year, and, like, you know, we have to see what happens next year now, how situation turns out, whether they'll be able to hold the Ram Lila next year. And he told me this. He said, forget about next year. I don't know how I'm going to spend every single day of the next 1 month. Like, you know, so there is a big emptiness that is there for these people who are so invested in this ritual, who are so invested in the performance and have been coming for the last many, many decades, that like, that not happening is a big blow, actually. But obviously, it can never happen. If you have time, in terms of the final, I mean, how it is changing, I just want to show about 4 or 5 images. That's all right, Louis?
I lost you for just a second, but I think you said you were going to try to show us a video.
No, just
Awesome.
4 or 5 photographs. Just
Oh,
4 or 5
photographs.
photographs. That's all right?
Perfect. Yeah, let me see if I can. I'm not sure if you can share your screen. Hopefully you can. Let's see.
Let me try.
I wonder if Stephen can enable. Oh yes, you are a co-host now. So let's see the photos.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And yes, for students that need to get to their next class, please feel free to log off. But we'll just hang out with Bhargav for a few more minutes to look at these images, because images are so key to understanding this.
Can you? Okay, let's see now. Okay, is it working?
It sure is. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So, do you see this image over here?
Yep.
And this is, I think, a lithograph print from 1825, made by a colonial officer in Banaras called James Prinsep. And this is a representation of one of the important days of the Ram Lila, when Ram wins the battle against the demon king Ravana. And as you can see, the grandeur of the performance in the 19th century, you have like huge elephants, multiple elephants of the Maharaja. You have huge crowds, and you have these huge effigies in the background, like and not just one or two, but many different effigies. So you can see the grandeur and get a sense of the Ram Lila from this particular print from the 1820s. A few other images. Now, these are photographs that I took in 2011. And these are photographs of the penultimate day of the Rmanagar Ram Lila, when Ram, who has won in battle, has returned back to Ayodhya. And this is the time when Ram has been coronated king. So chaos has been vanquished, order has been established, the story has come to an end. And this is the final arti, or the propitiation of the gods, at that or that moment when Ram is made the king. And you can see the crowds over here. This is people waiting for the arti to happen. And this happens in the first rays of the morning sun. So you can see people in the early darkness, like, waiting. And at the crack of dawn, slowly the actors are being prepared for the arti. And then you have people on every terrace, everywhere, every inch of space occupying. This is during the night of waiting, where people are singing and performing. And then waiting for the arti at dawn. And this is the crowd that gathers on that particular day. And the arti, which is a ritual where the flares are lit up and the gods are worshipped and propitiated, that lasts for a total of 5 minutes, but people are waiting for the entire night. And this is the kind of crowds that gather. Like, estimates say that there are about 80,000, 100,000 people who gather just to watch this particular event. And this is the arti happening. The flares have been lit, it's dawn. And this final image is what I took. This is the same event that we saw in the first image in 1825, which is the death of Ravana and the burning of the effigies, what was represented in the lithograph print. And this is what I've taken in 2019. And you see some differences. I mean, you see a sea of smartphones, so, one of the things that the Rmanagar Ram Lila has prided itself on is the fact that there are no electric lightings used and there are no microphones that are used. And this has been one of the main selling points, saying that we do it in the traditional way, that way. And we still don't use it. The lighting is through gas lamps, and there are no microphones, people are projecting and all that. But at the same time, it's important for us to remember that no performance tradition remains unchanged through the tides of time. Sure, the dramaturgy, they might have preserved it in a certain way, but at the same time, people have changed, the audiences have changed. So we need to think of it in a dialectical way, in the sense that, yes, things are changing. We live in a different world, and especially the political climate has changed, and the Ram Lila is susceptible to appropriation by the current regimes in many ways. But at the same time, we also see the crowds. In some way, we can argue that people's faith in the ritual has not changed. So it's important to keep these two perspectives in a balance and to hold the two in attention while understanding this ritual now in today's day and age. Yeah, that's about it.
Bhargav, thank you. You've given us such a gift of your time and your knowledge and sharing your personal experiences going to this performance. I always joke that I wish I could put all the students in a magic school bus and take everyone to where we're going, but this was the next best thing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
And there's lots of accolades in the chats that you should look at from our students. They're just going crazy over that. So thank you so much, Bhargav.
And it's always a pleasure to share about this.
Yeah, and from the place itself, and we also thank everyone that was asking questions. Those were really good questions. But let's be in touch soon, Bhargav, and
absolutely, thank you.
I hope that this beautiful tradition can come back soon. It's another testament to just the great sort of impact of the coronavirus on the whole world and on things that are really, really important to people and their communities. So thank you for adding this additional layer to it for us. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so
glad. All right, that's it. That's it for our class, y'all. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.